Lydia Carver's neighbors thought she was the perfect mother, until her home cameras revealed a truth so horrifying, even the police refused to watch the full footage twice. Lydia Carver had always been the kind of mother others admired from afar. She lived with her 7-year-old son, Evan, in a neat white house at the end of Maple Drive, the kind of street where neighbors waved from their porches and children rode bicycles until dusk. Lydia had moved there 2 years earlier after a painful divorce. She spoke little about her ex-husband, only mentioning that he worked overseas and sent letters occasionally. To the people around her, Lydia seemed like a woman who had rebuilt her life from ashes. Every morning, she would walk Evan to the school bus, her hand gently resting on his shoulder, a smile lighting up her tired face. He was a cheerful boy, always wearing mismatched socks and carrying a superhero lunchbox that clattered as he ran. Inside their home, everything looked peaceful. Family photographs filled the living room, Lydia holding baby Evan, Evan at his first day of school, the two of them at the beach, their faces glowing in the sun. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator, a bowl of fresh fruit always on the counter, and soft music humming from a radio in the kitchen. Anyone visiting would believe they had stumbled into the picture of a happy, stable family. Yet, beneath the gentle rhythm of their days, something had begun to shift. A quiet unease that Lydia couldn't name, but felt growing stronger with each passing week. It started subtly. A cup she didn't remember using appeared in the sink. A window she was certain she had locked stood slightly open in the morning. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard faint footsteps in the hallway. When she checked, Evan was asleep, curled under his blanket. She tried to laugh it off, blaming exhaustion or the creaks of an old house. But as days turned into weeks, the unease deepened. Lydia began to sense that someone, or something, was always watching. Her reflection in the mirror sometimes seemed delayed, a trick of the light that made her heart race. Toys she had put away were found scattered across the floor again. A smell of smoke drifted through the living room at night, though the stove hadn't been used. She told herself she was imagining it, but her body reacted as if it were real. Tense shoulders, sleepless nights, and eyes that darted toward every sound. Evan started to notice her nervousness. He asked why she locked the doors twice, and why the curtains stayed closed even during the day. Lydia reassured him it was just for safety, though the reassurance sounded hollow even to her own ears. As her fear grew, she began keeping lights on through the night. Her cheerful routines faded. The morning walks became silent, her smiles forced. She avoided neighbors and ignored invitations to community gatherings. The woman once praised for her calm strength was now seen as distant and withdrawn. But no one suspected that inside her spotless house, Lydia was beginning to unravel. In her mind, danger lingered just beyond the walls, invisible, waiting for her guard to drop. She felt it every time the wind rattled the windows, every time the pipes groaned after midnight. She told herself she was protecting Evan, that vigilance was love. Yet, without realizing it, Lydia was already crossing a fragile line, one that would soon shatter the illusion of her perfect life forever. After weeks of restless nights and gnawing unease, Lydia decided she needed proof of what was happening inside her home. The fear had become constant, creeping into every thought. She would wake to the faint hum of the refrigerator and feel certain it was breathing. When Evan left for school, she would wander from room to room, checking doors and windows, tracing her fingers along locks that already gleamed from overuse. Her hands trembled as she ordered a set of home security cameras online, convincing herself that once she saw what was really going on, the fear would disappear. When the package arrived, Lydia spent the entire afternoon installing the cameras herself. She placed one in the living room, one in the hallway, and another in the small kitchen where she often thought she heard whispers. A fourth camera went into Evan's bedroom, aimed at the door. She told herself it was only for protection, a way to keep them safe. That night, for the first time in weeks, She managed to sleep without waking every hour. The next morning, Lydia sat in front of her laptop, replaying the overnight footage. The first few hours showed nothing but the dim glow of night lights and the slow passing of time. But around 3 a.m., the living room camera flickered. A chair near the wall had shifted slightly. She replayed the clip again and again, trying to understand whether it was a trick of light or something else. She wanted to believe it was nothing, yet the feeling in her stomach told her otherwise. Over the next few days, more strange moments appeared. A cupboard door opened and closed on its own. A shadow passed across the kitchen floor, though no one was there. Once, the camera caught a faint reflection in the window, the outline of a person standing just behind her. Lydia stared at the image for hours, unable to decide if it was her imagination. The more she watched, the more she doubted everything, even herself. She called the police after the third incident, explaining that someone might be entering her house while she slept. 2 officers came to inspect the property. They checked doors, windows, and vents, but found no signs of forced entry. They assured her the security system was working perfectly. Lydia nodded, pretending to believe them. But inside, she felt they had missed something. Something only she could sense. As time went on, Lydia stopped leaving the house altogether. The outside world began to feel like the real danger, while the walls of her home became both her prison and her protection. She withdrew Evan from school, telling the principal he was unwell and would continue learning from home. Her neighbors, once used to her friendly waves, noticed the curtains were always drawn now. They whispered about her in the grocery store, wondering what had happened to the bright, smiling woman who once brought homemade pies to neighborhood events. Inside the darkened house, the cameras continued to record. Lydia spent her nights staring at the screens, convinced she would catch the intruder who haunted her peace. But the truth was far more disturbing. The movements, the whispers, the shifting shadows, they were all real, yet their source wasn't someone breaking in from the outside. The danger had already been inside her home, growing quietly, becoming stronger with every sleepless night. And though Lydia didn't yet know it, the cameras she had installed for safety would soon capture something that no one would ever forget. One gray winter morning, the phone rang at Brookville Elementary School. Evan's teacher, Mrs. Doyle, was concerned. The boy hadn't attended class in nearly 3 weeks, and every message sent home had gone unanswered. Lydia had told the school office that Evan was recovering from a severe flu, but the excuses kept changing. First it was a fever, then migraines, then something about a hospital visit that no one could confirm. Mrs. Doyle finally called the authorities for a welfare check. It was routine, but something in her voice hinted at worry. When officers arrived at Lydia's house, the air outside was cold and still. The curtains were drawn tightly, and faint static could be heard from inside. The hum of a television left on in an empty room. Lydia opened the door slowly. Her face looked pale, her eyes sunken, as if she hadn't slept in days. She greeted them politely but without emotion. The officers explained their visit and asked to look around. Lydia didn't argue. She simply stepped aside, letting them in. The interior of the house was spotless, but unnaturally so. Everything was in perfect order. Too clean, too arranged, as though someone had tried to erase any trace of life. The officers noticed the faint smell of bleach and the constant buzz of electronics. In the living room, a cluster of small black cameras blinked from the corners of the ceiling. Lydia explained that she had installed them for safety after strange activity. Her tone was calm, but her hands twitched when she spoke. As they searched, the officers found no sign of the missing boy. His bedroom looked untouched. The bed neatly made, toys stacked in careful rows, clothes folded perfectly in drawers. It was the kind of tidiness that felt rehearsed. On the kitchen table, they found notebooks filled with Lydia's handwriting, grocery lists, reminders, and strange notes written in the margins. Fragments like, "Keep the doors sealed," and "Don't let them find him." The words meant little without context, but they left a chill in the air. One officer, a young recruit, noticed something odd. The security cameras in most rooms were unplugged, their cords coiled on the floor. Only one camera, the one in the living room, was still running. The small red light blinked steadily, recording every second. He asked about it, and Lydia replied that she had been reviewing old footage for days, but hadn't deleted anything. When they requested to take a look, she hesitated for just a moment before nodding. That night, after obtaining a warrant, investigators retrieved the footage from the living room camera. The recordings spanned several nights. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Lydia moving through the house, cleaning, checking locks, and pacing from room to room. But as the hours of video played on, patterns began to emerge. Lydia appeared increasingly restless, often pausing to stare down the hallway as if she heard something. Sometimes she would sit perfectly still for hours, her eyes fixed on one point off-screen. Then came a moment that made the officers freeze. The camera caught Lydia walking toward a locked door at the end of the hall, one they hadn't checked earlier because Lydia said it led to storage. She opened it slightly, and for a brief second, the dim light inside revealed a small figure sitting on the floor. The child's clothes hung loosely, his hair unkempt, his skin pale. It was Evan. He wasn't missing. He had been there all along. The footage stopped before showing what happened next, but that single image changed everything. The officers sat in silence, realizing that what they had been searching for outside the house had been trapped within it the entire time. The case was no longer about a missing child. It was about something much darker. Something that had been hidden in plain sight, behind a mother's trembling smile and the quiet flicker of a home camera. The investigators replayed the footage again and again, trying to understand what they were seeing. The image of the small boy sitting silently on the floor haunted them. His eyes were open but unfocused, his arms wrapped around his knees as if trying to stay warm. The dim yellow light from a single bulb illuminated the room just enough to reveal the outlines of toys scattered across the floor. Cars, crayons, and a worn blanket folded neatly beside him. There was no sound, only the faint hum of the house. It was clear from the timestamp that this had been recorded just a few nights earlier. The officers knew they had uncovered something far more disturbing than a disappearance. As they watched further, the footage revealed a pattern that spanned several nights. Lydia would enter the small room carrying a tray of food, sandwiches, soup, or cereal. She would place it on the floor without a word, watching as Evan hesitated before eating. Sometimes she would stay for a few minutes, standing completely still, her expression blank and distant. Other times she would sit in the corner, rocking slightly, staring into the darkness as if lost in a world of her own. When she left, she always locked the door behind her. The camera's angle never captured what happened inside that room when she was gone, but the sounds that followed, soft thuds, quiet sobs, told enough of the story. Investigators were unsettled by her calmness in the footage. There was no anger, no visible aggression, only a cold detachment that made her actions even more chilling. They noted how methodically she moved, how she checked each lock before returning to the couch. The house seemed to operate on a rigid routine of her own design. At exactly the same times every night, she would turn off certain lights, whisper to herself, and look directly into the living room camera, as if aware of its presence. In one clip, she could be seen sitting on the couch long after midnight, motionless, her eyes fixed on the hallway that led to Evan's room. Hours passed, and she did not move. At one point, she rose slowly, walked to the camera, and adjusted it slightly, angling it toward the door of the locked room. Her face came close to the lens, expressionless, her eyes wide and unblinking. Then she turned and walked away. By now, the investigators had seen enough to return for another search. They arrived at the house early the next morning, armed with warrants and accompanied by child welfare officers. Lydia answered the door wearing the same clothes as the night before. Her hair was unbrushed, and her skin had taken on a grayish tone. She didn't resist when they entered again. She simply watched as they spread through the house. When they reached the locked door, Lydia stood silently beside it, clutching her hands together. One of the officers asked for the key. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and handed it over. The door creaked open, and the smell of stale air filled the hallway. The small room was empty. A few toys were scattered across the floor, and a single blanket lay in the corner, but there was no sign of Evan. The food tray from the video was still there, the soup long dried. Lydia didn't flinch. She just stared at the space as if it meant nothing. The officers realized she already knew he wasn't there. When asked where her son was, she didn't answer. She simply turned toward the living room camera, still blinking in the corner, and whispered something too quiet to hear. The footage that had revealed the hidden room had only raised more questions. Where had Evan gone? How long had he been kept there? And, most haunting of all, why did Lydia seem so certain the camera was still watching when everyone else thought it had stopped recording? The footage from the final night was unlike the others. Investigators who reviewed it later described an almost unbearable silence in the room, as though the house itself knew what was about to happen. The timestamp showed it was just after midnight. Lydia appeared in the frame, wearing a long gray sweater, her hair disheveled, her face pale and drawn. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if walking through thick water. In her right hand, she held a bowl of soup, steam barely rising from the surface. Her left hand trembled as she pushed open the door to the locked room. The dim light inside flickered once before steadying, revealing Evan sitting on the floor again, his body frail and thin, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Lydia knelt beside him and set the bowl down carefully, her movements gentle, almost tender. She sat against the wall, breathing heavily, her eyes fixed on her son. He did not speak or move. The silence between them stretched endlessly, filled only by the faint hum of the camera. For several minutes, Lydia stared at the floor, her lips moving soundlessly as if reciting something to herself. She reached for a small pillow that had been lying beside the blanket and held it in her lap. The moment seemed suspended in time. Then, without warning, she leaned forward. The camera caught her movements clearly. The way her hands tightened, the pillow rising and pressing down. Evan's small body struggled for only a few seconds before growing still. The faint sounds of the house, the creaks, the distant wind, continued as if nothing had changed. Lydia didn't cry, didn't move, didn't seem to register what she had done. She simply sat back, staring at the child lying motionless before her. Her breathing slowed, and for a long time she remained frozen, eyes glazed, her face expressionless. After several minutes, she lifted her head and looked directly toward the camera. The expression in her eyes was neither fear nor regret. It was something far emptier, a hollow acknowledgement that she knew she was being watched. Slowly, she stood up, adjusted her sweater, and walked to the light switch. She turned it off, and before leaving the room, she unplugged the camera's power cord. The screen went dark instantly. That was the last footage ever recorded in the Carver home. When officers arrived days later, following another welfare report, they found the room exactly as it had appeared in the video, except for Evan. There was no trace of him anywhere, no sign of struggle, no evidence of what had been done with his body. The blanket was folded neatly, the bowl still sitting in the same place, untouched. Lydia stood in the doorway when they entered, her face calm, her voice barely above a whisper as she repeated a single sentence over and over. "He's safe now." The investigators searched every corner of the property, the basement, and even the attic, but Evan had vanished completely. It was as if he had dissolved into the walls of the house. Forensic teams found faint fingerprints, marks of small hands along the doorframe, but nothing more. Lydia refused to speak further. Every question met with silence or the same haunting phrase. When she was finally handcuffed and led outside, she didn't resist. She only looked back at the dark windows of her home, her lips forming a faint, eerie smile, as though she knew something no one else did. That final recording would later become a key piece of evidence. Yet even after endless analysis, experts could not explain what drove Lydia to that moment. Some claimed she had lost touch with reality, consumed by paranoia and fear. Others believed she had convinced herself that ending her son's life was an act of protection. But to those who watched the footage, the most unsettling part was not the act itself. It was the look she gave the camera just before the screen went black, a gaze that seemed to reach beyond the lens, as if she knew it would one day tell her story. The town of Brookville fell into a strange quiet after Lydia Carver's arrest. News spread quickly, first through whispered conversations at the grocery store, then through headlines that seemed too disturbing to believe. Mother arrested after disturbing footage, found in CCTV. Missing child case. The community that once praised her kindness now struggled to comprehend how the woman they saw at bake, sales and school meetings could be capable of something so horrifying. Neighbors who had waved to her every morning now avoided driving past her house. The white home on Maple Drive, once a picture of normal suburban life, became a landmark of dread. Inside the police station, Lydia sat motionless during questioning. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her posture straight, her gaze distant. She did not cry or plead. When asked where Evan's body was, she responded only once, saying he was safe now and no longer afraid. Beyond that, she said nothing. Days turned into weeks as investigators searched every inch of her property, the surrounding woods, and even nearby streams. There was no trace of the boy. It was as if he had vanished completely from the world. Psychiatrists were called in to evaluate Lydia's mental state. Their reports described a woman suffering from severe delusional paranoia, likely triggered by years of isolation and untreated trauma. They discovered journals filled with her handwriting, neat, precise, and chillingly repetitive. She wrote about shadows moving through the house, unseen voices warning her that someone wanted to take Evan away. In several entries, she mentioned an entity that lived within the walls, whispering that the only way to protect her son was to keep him hidden forever. The final pages of her journal were filled with one repeated sentence, written over and over until the ink bled through the paper. "He's safe now. He'll never leave me again." The trial that followed was brief. Lydia's defense argued insanity, and the court agreed she was unfit for prison. She was transferred to a psychiatric facility on the outskirts of the city, where she spent her days in silence, refusing to speak to doctors or other patients. Nurses reported that she often stared at the security cameras in the hallways, smiling faintly as if she recognized them. Occasionally, she would ask if they were recording, and when told yes, she would nod slowly and whisper, "Good." Back in Brookville, the house remained sealed off by police tape for months before eventually being sold. The new owners, unaware of its past, moved in hoping for a fresh start. But strange reports began soon after. Lights flickered at odd hours. Toys moved on their own. The faint sound of a child humming was sometimes heard late at night, followed by the creak of the hallway door. Some neighbors claimed to see a figure in the upstairs window, a woman standing perfectly still, watching. Others said they heard a whisper when passing by the house, a soft voice repeating the same words found in Lydia's journals. Years later, the infamous footage resurfaced online, though no one could confirm how it leaked. It spread across forums and video platforms under the title The Carver Tapes. Most who watched it said the same thing, that the image of Lydia looking directly into the camera seemed too real, too aware. Experts insisted it was just another example of urban legend turned viral horror. Yet for those who knew the truth, the footage was not a story. It was evidence of a mind that had collapsed under its own fear, a mother whose love had twisted into something unrecognizable. Today, the house on Maple Drive still stands, empty and silent. The curtains remain closed, and though the electricity was long disconnected, some claim they've seen a faint red light flickering from the living room window. The light of a camera that should have stopped recording years ago.